Welcome to Love and the Planets, and we're looking at the week of December 18th, and I'm Margaret Gray in Dublin.
And I'm Armand Diaz in Glen Cove, Long Island.
Well, Armand in Glen Cove, Long Island, this is quite a week, isn't it? The lead up to the holidays, and we've got so many things happening. And of course, the biggie is Saturn going into Capricorn, which comes immediately after the Sagittarius new moon. And then, of course, we've also got solstice and we've got Christmas Eve. So there's a huge amount of things happening. And just to mention that we're going to do a holiday special next week, our recording, and to say that this, in case people haven't noticed, this is a particularly stressful time for all relationships. I mean, really, as if anybody wouldn't have noticed that. But the planets are not kind of very conducive to things being easy, are they, this year? I think more so than last year, as far as I can remember, because there's a lot of this it's a mixture of very erratic energy and yet very heavy energy coming in with all this Capricorn. What are your thoughts about this Sag new moon? Shall we start with the new moon just to kind of buoy us up a bit?
Well, yeah, if it buoys us up a little bit, that's great. It's at the very end of Sagittarius, where Saturn, Saturn does get into Capricorn, but Saturn's at the very end of Sagittarius, and I think that we've been feeling a lot of that. Sagittarius, a lot about belief systems and things like that. And Saturn has been, especially in the last couple of months, has really been making that very, very big issues. It's a Sagittarius new moon, but the moon, it's a new moon in Sagittarius, and then everything turns to Capricorn right away. So it's kind of like the balloon doesn't get very far off the ground before the leaden weight of Capricorn. Not that Capricorn's all about lead weight, but
No, of course not. No.
It's ruled by Saturn, and Saturn rules lead. So, I think that, it's not the most buoyant new moon.
It really isn't. And it does have an impact on relationships. It's conjunct Venus, so it's all about our self-value. And it's a lot about freedom. And I think it's interesting that there's that freedom-oriented energy with Sag, and yet there's the Saturn there, and then followed by Saturn, of course, moving into Capricorn. Now, this is a huge biggie. And we haven't had Saturn in Capricorn since 1988. And it's going to stay in Capricorn. Of course, it stays for 3 years. So two big things to kind of keep in mind, that there's whole generations having their Saturn return, of course, and that's the generation between 1988 and 1991 we're going to have their first Saturn return, which is a very interesting time in relationships, because it's often a time of making commitments or making decisions, or maybe even just buying a home or finishing one's studies, as well as people going through the second Saturn return, which is kind of the other side of life, maybe starting to think about more retirement or whatever. But, my thoughts, Armand, I was thinking about this Saturn in Capricorn. I was thinking for relationships, it feels a lot about commitments and a lot about duty. So it might be also responsibilities, taking care of elderly relatives, choices whether to stay in a relationship out of duty or out of love, and also really challenging, is this relationship real? What is real? What are the foundations of a relationship? Would you agree?
I think that that's a big part of it. We have to remember, too, that, Saturn is coming into his own sign of Capricorn, and he's coming up, behind Pluto, who's been there since 2008. So particularly for people that have been affected by the Pluto transit by having Sun or Saturn or the Moon or the ruler of the house of relationship, pretty much everybody in Capricorn or aspected by Capricorn, there's been some real disruptive energy. And I think that what happens now is that Saturn comes in, and I wouldn't say it's not disruptive in its own way, but it is a little bit more of a kind of like, what are you going to do about this? So I think if we look at our relationship changes over the course of the last, really almost the last decade, Saturn's coming through to sort of, solidify, make it more commitment oriented, and not to say that everybody's going to commit. It's like, some people will be committed. But the question becomes, what are you going to do in a practical way?
Very much so. And then, once it's moved into Capricorn, then the next day we have Venus and Sag square Chiron and trine Uranus. So one thing I would say with that combination in relationships is to be very careful not to do something jagged and erratic just out of the Chironian kind of feeling of ouchiness, of pain around it. I think there could be a temptation.
Oh, sure. With Uranus and Aries, there's going to be a huge temptation. I feel lousy, so I'm going to express myself to
Yes.
you about it. Sure, it's a very, very edgy energy. On the other hand, not everybody's going to be feeling all that bad, and I think that there's the possibility, that it's kind of the last little flare of Sagittarian fire energy as we enter this Capricornian period. So, it could actually be kind of a fun night too for some of us. For those of us that aren't suffering with other stuff, it could feel pretty good.
That's such a good point, Armand, because after that point, then we go into, of course, Thursday. The sun goes into Capricorn and marks the winter solstice for those of us in this hemisphere. And of course, the southern hemisphere, it's the summer solstice. So for those of us, we're really, going into the darkest time of the year. So it's really those very short days. And solstice is kind of always a poignant time. It feels like a time of, that winter darkness of hibernating, but things that flourish at that time are also very important, and it's really the main holiday kind of then going into also the the rest of the holiday period, plus then follow the next day by Mercury direct, of course, which will still be in shadow. So at least we've got something good coming up.
Well, I don't know if a Mercury station is going to be, if that's your good news,
Yeah.
because we have to remember that a lot of the more prominent mercurial problems happen around the stations. And, if you want to send a text to your loved one just to reassure or to make some plans and it gets lost, and then, there could be misunderstandings. So I think that's a little bit of a challenge comes that way. But, it'll be nice to have Mercury direct. Certainly Mercury's retrograde in Sagittarius has been a bear.
It's been very difficult, hasn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
people sort of talking about problems with travel arrangements and so on. And that's so important around the holidays, people trying to join loved ones, across distances and so on. And like here in Ireland, the Ryanair is going on strike again. So who knows, went on strike. So, there's a lot of those issues. And then Sunday, of course, we come to Christmas Eve for those who celebrate. But, regardless, it's kind of a general holiday, really. And Venus moves into Capricorn. So there we have a more serious commitment, responsibility, duty, obligations, but also potentially not to forget that Capricorn has also kind of a side to it that's about wisdom. So about grounding ourselves in ourselves and thinking, okay, what's the wisest decision I can make? And also it's very good on boundaries. So what are my boundaries, which might be very helpful for anybody celebrating Christmas Day and feeling like family issues can be overwhelming. What are my boundaries? And what are the boundaries around our relationship for people in an intimate relationship? How do I protect my relationship from getting too intruded upon by all this craziness that happens around the holidays?
I think too, Venus in Capricorn will joining the Sun and joining Saturn in Capricorn, which is Venus's meeting with Saturn happens soon afterwards. Very good, more formal aspects of holiday celebration. It's we've had the little calendar shift there that resulted in the Christmas holiday being in Capricorn. It's a very Sagittarian, Santa Claus-y type of holiday, but it actually happens in Capricorn. And I think maybe the formal aspects of things will be a little bit more favored with Venus coming into Capricorn. It seems, also I think for some people with Venus and Capricorn too, maybe you better have gotten a nice gift. Right?
True. And also to consider kind of around that time, people who don't have anything, to kind of maybe think about the Capricornian sense that we all have a kind of responsibility to each other and to people who don't have, roof over their heads or food on the table and so on. So it might make us a little bit more altruistic and to spread beyond ourselves.
What a beautiful thought to end our discussion of the week.
See you next week, Armand. Bye-bye.
Bye.